Don't call it a comeback. George Lucas has spoken up and said that maybe Disney has lost the plot when it comes to Star Wars. Let's talk about the original creator of Star Wars and what he has to say here on That Park Place. Hello, I am Jonas J. Campbell, an investigative reporter for That Park Place, and here with me is VashSky. We like to go over streaming, theme parks, movies, television, entertainment, all that stuff. Vash, are you ready to talk about George Lucas?
Absolutely. I'm always ready to talk about George Lucas. Oh man, I have so much respect for him for sure. And well, he is still very opinionated, it would seem.
Yeah. I was hoping that you would say yes, we can here, but silly joke notwithstanding. Let's get to George Lucas's comments from the Cannes Film Festival. George Lucas blasts Disney for not understanding Star Wars and the Force. This by John F. Trent. May 27th, from That Park Place. Star Wars creator George Lucas blasted the Walt Disney Company for not understanding the franchise and story, as well as the Force. There he is. Looks like he's probably celebrating Red Tails there. This is George Lucas. This is his wife, Melody Hobson. And perhaps these are these the actual Tuskegee Airmen, or are they their descendants? That's amazing, by the way. Stage full of heroes there. During an appearance at the Cannes Film Festival last week, The Hollywood Reporter detailed that Lucas informed a crowd, I was the one who really knew what Star Wars was, who actually knew this world, because there's a lot to it. The Force, for example, nobody understood the Force. Hey, Vash, can I ask you something?
Sure.
Who worked at Lucasfilm at the same time as George Lucas and is still there?
Well, I know Dave Filoni is one of them.
Interesting. Do you think this might be referring to Dave Filoni?
It might be, or maybe, I don't know, Leslie Headland, didn't she say something to the effect of like, George Lucas doesn't have all the answers. Nobody does. It's all of our, collective saga or whatever. And anybody could do what George Lucas did. Didn't she say something like that? I thought she said something like that.
This brings up a good idea in my head. The word authority comes from the word author there. So author meaning the person who is the authority on the subject, as opposed to writer. He added, when they started the ones after I sold the company, a lot of ideas that were in the original sort of got lost. But that's the way it is. You give it up. There was also a pretty big pause here in the middle of this statement. If you catch the video, and the video has surfaced. There's no official Cannes Film Festival video that's out there. It's everybody with their cameras and their phones and things like that. And if you're lucky enough, you can probably catch one that's about an hour and a half long. But Lucas is famous for criticizing Disney for its treatment of Star Wars after he sold the company to them back in 2012, ahead of the release of The Force Awakens in 2015. Lucas described Disney as, well, I'm just going to say it and see if YouTube reacts, white slavers. In an interview with Charlie Rose, he said, these are my kids, all the Star Wars films. I love them. I created them. I'm very intimately involved in them. I sold them to the white slavers that make these things. Okay, so first of all, Vash, what do you think he meant by that comment?
I think he has had a relationship with the studios that is very unique, right? And I think he understands what the studio system is all about. He understands what these executives are all about in taking these creations from these authors, like you said before, or these content creators, and really kind of exploiting them or activating those brands, so to speak, right?
Right.
And scale them up and leverage them as much as possible. And I think that's what he was referring to there. Like I said, the relationship they had with Fox before when creating Star Wars, and how they treated him before and after. I think he's speaking from experience there.
I think you're right. If we just go back to the history of Bob Iger's acquisitions, Pixar went really well. That was mostly an acquisition in order to obtain Mr. John Lasseter there, but I don't think they could have gotten John Lasseter if Pixar didn't come with it. They acquire Pixar and look at the state that Pixar is in now. Obviously, Marvel is on that list, and look where Marvel is now. It seems like Kevin Feige might have been the last survivor of Marvel Entertainment, as opposed to the guy who was the engineer of the entire MCU. I get the idea here that maybe Disney is struggling to connect with that creative spirit that they once had, and becoming kind of a corporate monolith. Let's talk about what actually happened here because this is a detail that I don't think it ever needs to be forgotten. After detailing how Lucas had written a number of outlines for a sequel trilogy, how he made sure to purchase them. This is talking about Bob Iger making sure to purchase them, and then chose to go in a completely different direction with the sequel trilogy. Iger said, now in the first meeting with him about the future of Star Wars, George felt betrayed. And while this whole process would never have been easy for him, we'd gotten off to an unnecessarily rocky start. So Bob Iger neglected to tell George Lucas, one of the most amazing and prolific and legendary filmmakers of the last 50 years here, that, all those story treatments that we bought, we're going to completely ignore them. The company that you got Steve Jobs to vouch for you in order to purchase Lucasfilm. Instead, George Lucas gets the no. We wanted to buy these so that they would go in a vault somewhere. Maybe we'll throw them in the garbage. We just need to make sure that these things don't see the light of day. Of course, George Lucas is going to be offended when he finds out that you've ignored his artistic vision. You bought his artistic vision.
Well, yes, absolutely. Now, it's interesting to hear this because Bob Iger is saying, well, I made it very clear to him that we had the right to either pursue his stories or not. So there seems to be, at least in George Lucas's opinion, that wasn't made at least abundantly clear before letting this franchise go. That may speak to the tension between these two men and how that deal went down and what decisions were made, where to take this franchise in the future.
Right. Now, this section of the book, I've read this book a couple of times, once as an Iger fan, and another time as maybe this guy's not everything he purports himself to be. This section has one of the greatest little excerpts. After George Lucas had agreed to sell Lucasfilm, that's when George Lucas stepped down and put Kathleen Kennedy in charge. It's George Lucas who chose Kathleen Kennedy. And it's not clear in the book whether or not Kathleen Kennedy was told that Lucasfilm was in the process of being sold to the Walt Disney Company. So Bob Iger makes that clear in the book that he didn't hire Kathleen Kennedy. Anyways, moving on. During an appearance at the East Harlem School at Exodus House in October of 2020, Lucas answered a question from 7th grader Jeremiah. The world has changed so much since the first Star Wars movie. How do you think changes in the fight for racial justice will impact the Star Wars universe going forward? The creator of Star Wars answered, I don't know. I mean, I kind of lost control of Star Wars, so it's going off in a different path than what I intended. But the first 6 Star Wars films are very much mine and my philosophy. And I think that philosophy sort of goes beyond any particular time because it's based on history. It's based on philosophy. It's based on a lot of things. He's in the background of this shot here. I don't think this is something that he thought would be recorded and recounted all these years later. Vash, does this sound like he's disowning the Disney Star Wars films?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure George has been asked to cool it with with the criticism towards Star Wars in the past, and so I'm sure he's a bit more reserved when it comes to public or forward-facing interviews, and then maybe a little more candid in a setting like this. So I think that kind of speaks to the contextual differences between those. And he really did say a lot. Not only here, but at Con, he was talking about the future of AI. He was talking about how pitching films like Star Wars or pitching original content is something that studios seemingly are uninterested in because they're they want the familiar or they want that built-in audience and leverage those as much as possible. And so when he talks about philosophy, when he talks about these greater things that Star Wars used to be about, he's speaking to that as well, I think.
I think you're right, and that I'm there's part of me that wants to just go do every frame a pause on that George Lucas interview there. His thoughts on technology as a person who was a technologist, if I'm using that word correctly, throughout his entire career. I mean, he was always pushing the envelope, even when he's doing things like Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. Apparently that was a test for the digital technology that they used in the prequels. He's a person who was always on the forefront of technology. Here's where John Trent goes with it, and I think he makes a very good point. It's highly likely that Lucas's conception of Star Wars and the Force will continue to be maligned by Disney in its upcoming The Acolyte series. Actress Amanda Stenberg told Empire that the show is set in a time in the galaxy where the people use the Force is, in canon, it's very expansive. It doesn't necessarily have the more rigid conceptions that it might have later in the Galactic Republic. She added, so that provides us the opportunity to maybe explore the different way this character relates to the Force. That does not give me hope hearing a statement like that.
What? Why buy a franchise if you're just gonna completely change it, like and make it your own, so to speak? I mean, why not just create something new in which you could have, what limitless possibilities, instead of taking what is very much structured, which very much has a canon to it, the rules and so forth of this universe, and then completely manipulating to their own to your own will. I mean, I guess it's how we get lightsaber whips. It's so unfortunate.
Yeah. Let's talk about lightsaber whips and some of the stuff that's going on there right now. Of note, Lucas' comments also appear to contradict Lucasfilm's marketing push that Dave Filoni is the heir to George Lucas, or that he was George's apprentice. Lucasfilm attempted to spin this narrative back in September while promoting the Ahsoka series. The Mandalorian creator Jon Favreau recalled in the featurette a set visit from Lucas. George visited the set, and when we were filming the lightsaber fight in the Japanese garden in season 2, not a bad episode, by the way. It was a little odd to see Ahsoka there. It was the introduction of the flat, and I mean the flat characterization of Ahsoka, but she at least had a lot of things to say. Maybe you could read it as her being guarded or something like that, instead of it being her being just kind of emotionless, as they've written her as Ahsoka the White, kind of a Gandalf-like figure. Although I would say that's also a misinterpretation of Gandalf. And I think, to go back to the quote, and I think he was really encouraging of Dave stepping up to this role, and so George would turn to Kathy and myself and be proud of Dave. He said he was Dave's teacher and Dave was his apprentice. In that same documentary, they always talk about how there's always a master and there's always an apprentice. They're using a George Lucas quote, and then they go to this, so it makes it sound like George Lucas is saying Dave Filoni is my apprentice, but I somewhat feel like that is Disney marketing, taking the pieces of what's there in order to force a narrative. I'm reminded of the expanded universe novels that George Lucas was aware of. The legend when I was a kid was that George Lucas read every word of those novels and approved every single word of those novels. Looking at it, I'm going through the Heir to the Empire, the Thrawn trilogy here, and instead of using the word Sith, they use Dark Jedi, even though I think the word Sith existed at that point. So, George could have said, don't use Dark Jedi, use Sith. But by the time the prequels roll around, they're Sith. This is a word that did not appear in the original trilogy. So the idea that Lucas truly approved of everything in the EU can be a little tenuous sometimes. Of course, there's probably a huge EU fan that can correct me on that, and that's no problem. Maybe I'll send this to Lauren Connor, and he'll give me, well, actually, as he often does. I love it when he does, because he's a fountain of knowledge there. I look at the Dave Filoni Clone Wars stuff, and I wonder if George Lucas had that same relationship with the Clone Wars. Like, yeah, you can do whatever you want with this within reason, Dave Filoni. But when I want to make a movie, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. I wonder if that's the relationship there. Vash, you have anything to comment on that? Or are you not one of those nerds that reads the books and watches the cartoons?
Oh, no. I'm definitely one of those nerds for sure. I got boxes and boxes and boxes of books that have been pilfered from secondhand shops and all kinds of stuff in order to really take in the EU as much as possible. And there were aspects of it that I loved, aspects of it that could change, and I was supportive of Disney looking at those stories and saying, okay, how can we take the best of these stories and incorporate them into our ever-expanding universe. I think George Lucas's take on the EU was like, okay, it's fine, I'll approve certain things, and maybe I'll even incorporate those into my own stories. But my stories kind of have the definitive final say, and everything is pushed out, so to speak, in order to make way for what I want to do. I think that was appropriate.
Levels of canonicity, right?
Right.
So,
exactly.
So there's comic books, there's books, there's animated features, and then there's the movies. And movies would always be the A-level canon. I think Disney might be getting back to that idea themselves in some of their pillar brands. So hopefully Star Wars doesn't get to that level where the TV canon is different than the movie canon, unless they can come along and maybe erase some awful things that happened somewhere in the 2012 to 2019 phase. I don't know, but let's throw this to our commenters down below. What do you think about these comments from George Lucas? Is this a comment about the prequel trilogy and we're just misinterpreting it here to be about Disney Star Wars? Would George Lucas ever actually comment on Disney Star Wars in any definitive way? And if he did, what do you think he'd say? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Of course, if you like this video, like this video. And by the way, if you want to talk about the Galactic Star Cruiser, if we want to get into the most Disney of Disney Star Wars, we're doing a live stream that is going to be about this 4-hour video that a YouTuber by the name of Jenny Nicholson did on the Galactic Star Cruiser. We're going to be talking about that Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Be there and be square. And consider subscribing to That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.
Thanks for watching That Park Place News. For more information, consider checking out www.thatparkplace.com. And don't forget to subscribe, share, like, and send this out on your favorite social media accounts.